I'd like to welcome everyone to today's Grand Rounds. We have a very special event. It is the Leahey Lecture, and we're going to begin with an introduction by Dr. Murdoch Riley. Dr. Riley.
Good evening. It's a great pleasure to introduce the Leahey Lecture today. I'm Murdoch Riley, the director of the Irving Institute, home of this lectureship at the Department of Medicine. The annual Leahey Lecture is sponsored by the Leahey Foundation, the Department of Medicine, and the Irving Institute for Clinical Translation and Research, and it memorializes two outstanding Columbia individuals. Edward B. Leahey for his pioneering cardiac research, and his brother Michael I. Leahey for his vital contributions to clinical research, infrastructure, and clinical trials at Columbia. Edward was trained at Columbia Age-Loss College of Physicians in the 70s and joined faculty in 1978, and is remembered in particular for his discovery of life-threatening interaction between digoxin and quinidine, something of fundamental importance in clinical pharmacology, and for much other additional research. And he died of a cardiomyopathy young in life, which was one of the reasons for the foundation. And then Michael came after that really to kind of address infrastructure issues in that context, to organize clinical trial office clinical trials and clinical research at Columbia, and really advanced a massive clinical trials operations over the following decade at the medical center, and contributed to infrastructure that allowed Columbia faculty to really succeed and excel in clinical trials over that time. So the Leahey Lecture takes place once a year, and it really is established to address scientific administrative issues on the conduct of clinical research and clinical translation, including relationships among academic medical centers, governments, and industry. And in that context, today's lecture is a very special one. I want to welcome anyone from the Leahey family who's here in attendance today. It's hard on Zoom to know who's here, but I think Frances might be here, and I want to welcome her in particular, and any of the family members. I also want to acknowledge and welcome members of faculty from Stanford connected to Frances, who also are connected to our medical center and our programs, Columbia as a satellite. So I'll hand over to Don and he can continue the introductions, but welcome.
Thank you, Murdoch. So today we have a very special treat. It's a dialogue with Dr. David Kessler, Chief Science Officer for the COVID response for the administration of President Joe Biden. It's going to be conducted as a dialogue with Magda Sobieszczyk, serving as the moderator. She's well known to all of us, Professor of Medicine, Chief of the Division of Infectious Diseases. And by way of quick background, she is the leader of the NIH-funded Clinical Trials Unit at Columbia, dedicated to HIV research, but more recently, COVID-19. Her research focuses mainly on vaccines, but also monoclonal antibodies and pre-exposure treatments for both HIV and also the COVID virus. During the pandemic, she was part of the NIH-funded COVID Prevention Network, overseeing the NIH-funded COVID trials. She's also been a national and local leader of vaccine trials in the United States. And her work at Columbia has looked at the epidemiology, clinical outcomes of COVID-19, as well as assessing vaccine responses and post-vaccine course. She also leads research on assessing health disparities and social determinants of COVID-19 outcomes in Black and Latinx communities. So the perfect moderator. Back to today's speaker, Dr. Kessler, MD, Harvard, JD, on the faculty of Columbia Law School for a period of time. He is the former commissioner of the United States Food and Drug Administration, serving from 1990 to 1997. His background also includes stints as Dean of the Medical Schools at Yale and at UCSF, from which he received a very interesting award I'll mention at the very end. He's famous for his streamlining of drug approval processes and device approvals, and yet maintaining the high degree of attention to outcomes and standards. He has an extensive paragraph of awards. I can't possibly go through them. Of course, he's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, but also he holds the 2008 National Hero Award from the School of Public Health at the University of California, Berkeley, for his leadership as the nation's top drug regulator and his courage in challenging the US tobacco industry. So a man of accomplishment and courage, it is our pleasure to welcome Dr. Kessler.
Thank you. Thanks, Don, and thank you, everyone. And David, I just wanted to add my welcome to Murdoch's and Don's. Thank you so much for spending this hour with us. There is a lot to talk about. So let's get started. And again, as we sort of said, this will be a dialogue that I'm excited to kind of engage you in. But maybe let's just start with a general question. You've been leading this monumental effort to accelerate the development, manufacture, and distribution of coronavirus vaccines and antivirals. And I would really like to sort of invite you to kind of share with us your thoughts and reflections on this government and public health effort. What was it like? Love to hear from you about the challenges as well.
It's been, I mean, for me personally, you know, I got a phone call close to 2 years ago. Could I help advise? Originally, it was a friend in Washington from the Clinton years, Anita Dunn, who said, can you help us? We're running a campaign and we don't know what to do. The Philadelphia office was up. It was a Friday. It was before anything shut down. I remember, you know, taking a look, and it was about 3 o'clock on Friday. And I said, you know, everybody home. And they listened. That was that Friday. And then the call came from that weekend. Would you be willing to start briefing the then vice president? He had his he had his economic team, he had his national security team, but they didn't know anything about public health. And I said, sure. And they said, would you do it? Would you kindly do it with Dr. Murthy? Dr. Murthy was a student when I was dean at Yale. So we, you know, we were friends. And we started that Monday. And it was really he's done this several times in his career where he decides he wants to learn everything he can about an issue. So we would start briefing him. No one told us what to do. Sometimes the briefing materials were some 90, 100 pages. We get to about a half hour and say, Mr. Vice President, we're over time. And he says, no, keep on going. I need to know this. And at one point, you know, I mean, we were doing this literally every day, and we were trying to, you know, I mean, in some ways his behavior and what he did was sort of modeling it for the nation. And at one point, one of the more pertinent moments, I think, you know, I had with him was, you know, we were, you know, it's one thing when you're running for president. It's another thing realizing that when you're going to become president, you're going to inherit. I mean, if you look at the curve, certainly from our colleagues at, you know, out in Seattle, IHME, I mean, the peak of this was going to be, at least when we were looking at it, come inauguration day, that was going to the peak. So you know you're going to, what you're going to end up inheriting in that kind of weight to be responsible. And I sort of joked with him. I said, Mr. Vice President, I'll make you a deal. You become president, we'll take care of vaccines and drugs. So it was really in that spirit that we've kept on going. I think you're right. I think that, I mean, it really has been a true honor. I mean, I've had the privilege to work with a team, but I think the Commonwealth, you know, Fund put out a report, you know, a few weeks ago, you know, independent of us. And I think that they've, you know, estimated some 2.3 million lives saved. This is because of the vaccination effort, 2.3 million lives saved, 17 million hospitalizations were prevented, 66 million cases, and they, you know, avoided some $900 billion in healthcare costs. I mean, that is, I think, you know, through the enormous efforts of my predecessors and the entire teams, and certainly all the frontline workers, you know, at your place, you know, need to be cited here. but really an historic effort when you think about those numbers. 2.3 million lives saved because of the vaccine effort. But I wake up this morning, I'm actually, when I go to bed, I get the nightly report. It comes in around midnight, and I see cases week over week up 21% as of yesterday. Hospitalizations seem to be holding. It was the first night where hospitalizations were just up 0.3%. You'll tell me what you're seeing in your house, but we're certainly, seeing that 21% rise. We don't know whether this is a blip. We don't know whether this is, what that holds. We're monitoring, variants, XD, XE, the recombinant variants. I was on a phone with our South African colleagues this weekend, BA4, BA5, and we're still very early. We're hyper attuned to these variants, but there seems to be some growth advantage. And again, if you look in Gauteng province, maybe there's 90 cases, in KwaZulu-Natal, a few dozen. So we don't know exactly where this is going to go, but we certainly know, from the wonderful evolutionary virologists we have, there's plenty of room for this virus to continue to mutate. And I think the one thing that, I've always been, the hardest thing is to predict anything. I mean, CDC will never predict anything. I mean, that's their rule. And, even where are we going to be in cases in 2-3 weeks? I think, New York City, if I'm correct, is on the verge of shifting to yellow from green. I think you're at about 190 cases out of 100,000, just about going from green to yellow under the new CDC standards. I think that the only thing that it shows, we are not done yet, right? I think this is as I say, the beat goes on. Now, whether we have, broken the link between cases and hospitalizations, which is really the goal. I mean, obviously, a huge number of cases on Omicron, a very significant number of, hospitalizations with Omicron. No doubt it was milder, but with the huge number of cases, we were still seeing, significant hospitalizations. Look, if we've broken the link with hospitalizations, we'll have to see. But my guess is we're going to continue to see these rises. And I don't think this is just the flu.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I think, you're right. It's hard to predict what will happen. And I sort of feel like every time we try to predict, we're always like a little bit wrong, a little bit off. And you were asking kind of, what we're seeing here locally in terms of the uptick in cases. And, we haven't, we sort of also daily monitor, get sort of daily reports about COVID testing, as well as COVID admissions across the Presbyterian hospital system. We haven't seen yet an uptick in admissions from COVID, but we're certainly hearing a lot about positive sort of test results on the outpatient. So individuals who are kind of getting that, sort of the mild and moderate symptoms, and then calling and asking about treatments, right? Treatment for early disease, if they fall into that sort of risk group. They'll be eligible for treatment. And that certainly has been, kind of, as we were reflecting on sort of the deployment and distribution of vaccines, the distribution of antivirals has also been an incredible effort that we've sort of, that you've been a part of and we've kind of witnessed in the last several months.
When we stepped in officially on January 20th, obviously our predecessors, and the companies had already begun, the clinical trials, on the vaccine side, but there was very little work done on the antiviral side. Going back to, I was medical director at Einstein back in the 80s. We ran Montefiore, the Rikers Island Prison Health Service. I remember exactly where I was, when Bert King from Rikers Island said, what is this thing we're seeing with fever and lymphadenopathy? I remember where I was standing. And, we worked hard in the 1990s on, the antivirals, the proteases really doing accelerated approval and really turned around that disease, with those protease inhibitors. So when we came in, Tony and I worked together very closely, and he at NIAID, us at FDA, and we did DDI. I remember pushing Tony and I actually calling Bristol Myers and said, "Where's the data? We need to move ahead on those antivirals." That was back in the 1990s. So when we came in, I said, "Look, we have to push hard on the antivirals," and we invested in 3 last year. 2 hit, 1 hit significantly. And one of the things I'd love to talk about, the efficacy is, I don't think could be better. 89%, again, has to be started early. It's a clunky drug. It's 30 tablets over 5 days, taking ritonavir. You're the expert. Right. I have a list of pages and pages of drug-drug interactions because of that ritonavir. So, one of the things we put out Evusheld for, pre-exposure prophylaxis for the immunocompromised. And I think we have a lot of work to, if this disease is going to be with us, right, even if we can, keep separate out so that the hospital, not overwhelmed with hospitalizations. I'm struck with the efficacy of this, but we need to get the uptick in the use of these drugs. I don't know what you're seeing, but I would love to. It takes a while for docs to become comfortable using a drug, right? And especially, you're comfortable with the HIV. Ritonavir is nothing for you, right? But for the average primary care physician, when do I hold the statin? What do I do about the when can I use this? When can I not use this? But I am noticing just anecdotally, and I call Pfizer, and I start a patient, and 2-3 days later, they, again, it's all anecdotal. There seems to be, we look at that viral load, and there seems to be a reduction in symptoms through the clinical trials. You save about 2-3 days earlier. I wonder whether it's going to have any effect on long-term COVID. We need, and we don't have, and I've pushed Pfizer to get that. We need better antivirals, but we also need to get people comfortable in using both. I see this coming down to, yes, we have the vaccines, right? But the vaccines are not, for better or worse, we can talk about, improving the vaccines against, the VE against symptomatic disease obviously has dropped. They're great against hospitalization and death. That has held. But, getting therapeutics and getting docs comfortable to use them is absolutely essential. And I think we all got to work on that over the next couple of months, especially if this disease is not going away.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And, to kind of your comment about the it's sort of how to make sure that there is enough sort of coverage, so to speak, with antivirals, or at least availability. I think it's both kind of the availability and access, as well as the prescriber's comfort level, right? And then also the patient's awareness of its existence, so that they ask their provider for, well, what, so, and they actually, they call their provider with a positive test result and ask for, what are my options? And I've seen, and I think you're reflecting on this as well, I've seen that in the last several weeks, there has been a shift in terms of providers' comfort to a large extent in prescribing it. And I'm hearing sort of a lot more patients have an easier time getting access to it. I remember the first time I tried to prescribe it, it was not to a patient of mine. It was eligible for it. It wasn't available. And now it's there are just many more pharmacies where it's accessible, right? And I think that's also that's been a huge effort. I'll let you
So
comment,
we went from something like
Mhm.
60,000 doses in December. You know, we now have delivery of 2.5 million. This is regimens,
Mhm.
right? 2.5 million regimens. So I mean, I think that we're pretty close to 90% of Americans within at least 10 miles. We got to get that down to 5 miles. So you know, there's a great. If you just go test to treat, if you type that in, test to treat, you'll get a locator. That's not just the test to treat, but it's also for physicians who prescribe, and it'll show you the list of pharmacies. And I think almost everywhere there should be a pharmacy within 10 miles, if not shorter, that has it in stock. But it's still complicated, right? I mean, it's approved for high risk individuals, right? And then it has, as you said, these drug-drug interactions. So who do you use it in?
Mhm.
Right? I mean, you go to the CDC website. I mean, there's still a good deal of clinical judgment, and I don't know what you're doing. So if I have a BMI of 30, right, and I'm 50, am I high risk?
Right. And
Right.
then, yeah.
I mean, so there's, I mean, and I think we have to get comfortable with this, and we have to really see the benefits. And then, you know, I mean, if people are not ending up in the hospital, I mean, it has a terrible metallic taste, right? And there's some dysgeusia, about a 6% side effect profile. And again, the most important thing is that, you know, there's literally hundreds of drug-drug interactions that you got to be careful on. So, I mean, you know, and again, we had been using the monoclonals, and we can talk about that. But I mean, our job is to find some additional antivirals this year, especially if, I mean, if this disease, in essence, if we're going to see this, I mean, use whatever, you know, it's going to be endemic. This disease is going to be chronic. It's going to be recurring. You know, it's going to be seasonal. I mean, the most important thing is I need help from my medical colleagues to become comfortable with the therapeutic side, because the vaccine is not going to take care of this entirely.
Mm-hmm. So before we go back to the vaccines and monoclonals, like what can we expect in your thoughts in the near future, sort of when looking at the next generation antivirals?
So there are, I mean, again, I think, you know, all congratulations to Pfizer. I think they did a great job. Also to Merck. I mean, the efficacy is not that high. Short order, they were really, I mean, heroic efforts. I mean, we went to phase 2, 3. I mean, there are at least 2 antivirals. I want to be careful naming companies and not, you know, not influencing markets. But there's at least 2 antivirals that I see as really potential, that if we had the dollars, right, if we had the investment, and we can talk about where we are on having dollars for COVID, but if we had the dollars, I'm pretty convinced that we could bring at least, look, you never know what hits, right, in the end of the day, and these are always complicated, and you know, what's the adverse event profile going to be? But I think we can do once a day antiviral this year. Probably, you know, it'll take a good 9 to 10 months, but I think that is, I mean, I was just talking to my colleagues at the White House. I think that's one of the highest priorities. Let's bring another 1 or 2. And look, you've lived this. I mean, you changed the course of HIV, and what was critical there was not to have one antiviral, right? But the range of antivirals with, you know, there's always the question of resistance, you know, staring at us. So I think it's absolutely essential that investment be made. And I have some concerns about the money and whether that money is going to be available from the Congress.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's definitely, I agree with you about it's the choices, the therapeutic choices, so that for, you know, for patients, that also sort of, you know, the provider and the patients can kind of make joint decisions about which agent to rely on, especially kind of the sort of different side effect profiles, et cetera. Right. Yeah.
You know, look, the monoclonals, I mean, just terrific. We're an excellent bridge, into the antivirals, right? But as we started moving into the variants, I don't know if David Ho's in the audience, but just really heroic work on the part of his lab. But we were playing whack-a-mole, to be honest, because there was just as the variants changed and as the the antigenic structure changed, we were losing efficacy to the point where we're really down to, for treatment, just to one, the Lilly, the BEB molecule. But we really do need to talk about the immunocompromised. I think that Evusheld, the AstraZeneca monoclonal, I think has marked efficacy. We don't exactly know the duration, right? FDA, is adjusting that. But we do need to be able to be comfortable in treating the immunocompromised. And I think there's still a very great need for docs to be comfortable in prescribing that. And we are under prescribing that and not protecting individuals who need protection. They're under an illusion that the vaccine is working. And I think, again, I need help from the medical community to really take over. These things take months and years to develop medical practice, right? It doesn't happen overnight. We put 3 new drugs on the market in December, and I'm somewhat concerned that they're underutilized, but and they're not out there for the immunocompromised. It just takes time. People have to come comfortable with it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's that you were talking sort of even kind of earlier about the provider education, right? Kind of in that space. And sort of similarly, kind of shifting a little bit, we're talking about immunocompromised individuals, how do, the monoclonals are kind of bridging them, and vaccine, additional vaccine doses are being recommended for individuals with immunocompromising conditions and booster doses, et cetera. And kind of, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of that recent recommendation about the second COVID booster for individuals above the age of 50, and certainly though, and younger with immunocompromising conditions. What's tell us a little bit maybe about just what's your why would you, what's been sort of behind this recommendations, data kind of supporting that, and then maybe, and again, we're not going to be predicting the future, but kind of looking into the future a little bit, kind of into the fall season when I think we're going to expect having to do additional doses yet again. So it'd be great to sort of talk about that.
Yeah. So the data that we saw showed, and correct me, but I think, overall in the mRNA, I saw a waning of protection at about 4 to 6 months, about 10% on hospitalization. We went from maybe, down to 80%, 78%, VE. We lost about 10% at about 4 to 6 months, right? But it held pretty strongly on hospitalization. If you use, presentation to the emergency department, which is sort of a new endpoint, you saw about a 30% waning over that 4 to 6 months. And then you saw about a drop off against Omicron, right? Because, we developed this vaccine, against the prototype, the ancestral, but, for symptomatic disease, we saw a drop of about 50%. Right. So, to talk openly and candidly, there was, there's a considerable debate, right? If we're, what's this vaccine for? Is it to prevent serious disease, or is it to prevent symptomatic infection? And what do you want to do? And if you see the waning, look, anyone can make these decisions if you have all the data. But all we had were basically that 10% drop on hospitalization, holding pretty strong, but it really did drop on symptomatic infection. Now, did that symptomatic infection, was that a signal of what we were going to see with regard to hospitalization? So, I mean, there was internal debate on this, right? I mean, and I'm sure if if the VRBPAC had debated, I mean, people would be on all sides of this. It's holding for serious disease. No, it's not holding for symptomatic infection. Symptomatic infection is not just any infection. It has a significant economic toll. There are people who want to protect. So I think at the end of the day, I mean, we all got behind. I mean, if you ask Tony and Rochelle and Vivek and me and Rachel and Rob and Peter and Janet, I mean, we all basically viewed this as a bridge, right? I mean, this was basically to buy time, to be honest. We didn't know, I mean, we lucked out because you'll remember we made a decision, last fall, right before the Omicron, right? And we offered boosts there. And there was a great deal of controversy to that. People, opposed that. There were people who, left the staff, said boosts were not necessary. But I think in retrospect, everybody was very glad that those boosts were available. Everything is timing this, right? So we sort of lucked out. We made that recommendation. There was Omicron. So we don't know, when the next wave is going to be. Are we in it now? We still, I mean, I can't tell you, even with that 21% last night, right? What are we in, right? So, what we wanted to do, I mean, we all see a campaign. Look, no decision has been made, but we're all prepared and recognize that going into winter, we're going to need to offer, this is going to need to be a seasonal campaign. But we were concerned with that waning at 4 to 6 months, that those who were at high risk, right, should have the opportunity to be boosted, because we didn't want to have an onslaught of cases and people not be protected. But you notice we didn't go out there, and this wasn't a major, yes, the president, on TV got his, 4th dose, but it was a recommendation. But I think it was a little bit of a soft recommendation. Maybe that's the wrong way to say it. So did we do the right thing by offering the 4th dose, or you think we?
No, I think it needed to be made available, if only to sort of raise kind of public awareness of and provider awareness also of the data kind of behind the waning effectiveness, let's say, against infection, and maybe to a certain degree kind of against sort of hospitalization kind of in individuals who've gotten sort of just only one booster. And I think everything is sort of 2020 hindsight, right? I think that the fact that that people got their first booster in the fall, and I really think made a big difference
Right.
in the Omicron wave. So I can kind of appreciate that there was sort of that same sort of kind of trying to sort of accomplish that same sort of finesse, the situation here as well, and just get ready for an uptick, especially in individuals who are older, who've gotten their boosters earlier, right? Who've gotten their first booster earlier.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, and then I also just kind of wanted to reflect on this issue about how what do these vaccines do? I think one thing that we kind of need to drive the message across and really make it clear that we're not trying to prevent mild sniffles, right? These vaccines are really they're not preventing mild infection, but they really are kind of turning the tide and kind of making a big difference in terms of preventing sort of more severe outcomes in vulnerable people.
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, we can't go on with a schedule of every 4 to 6 months, right? I mean, that's not sustainable to have people vaccinated. I mean, in my opinion, we need, much of our attention right now, quietly is to see whether we can increase the durability as well as the breadth of coverage, right? I mean, we've been thrown, this was all fine against, this was marked efficacy, against the ancestral strain This was great efficacy. There was almost no waning against Delta, right? But but throw the antigenic shift. I mean, with Omicron, it's sort of remarkable that the vaccines have held as well as they've held against hospitalization. But we need, and we're very, very focused on for the fall, to see whether we can tweak this vaccine so that we can get some increased durability as well as breadth. We are seeing some, I mean, we're not talking about changing the platforms. I mean, the real advantage of the mRNA is that, we can probably say to Pfizer and Moderna, we need to do a strain change and probably start producing 100 million a month, 2 months after. So that's the great thing about the mRNA. That's not the same thing, in some of the protein or the viral vector. They're much more, creating the seed takes a lot more work. We are starting to see data, again, very preliminary, and we'll have to see, but that a bivalent booster that has both prototype and, interestingly, beta. And that, I mean, you have to understand, we started this work last summer before Omicron even existed. So we were, you'll remember, well, the increase in South Africa. So we really were testing combinations against beta, and we find, very significant increases, maybe twofold against, I don't want to get out ahead of the data, with a bivalent beta prototype vaccine against Omicron. Now, we will have, and we are working feverishly, because you have to understand, we need the data by May, June, July in order to have vaccine produced by September, October. I mean, this doesn't, you can't just snap your fingers at that. And what we need to see an Omicron prototype vaccine and what the data will show on that. Now, we have 6-month data on beta prototype, and that seems to withstand improved durability. They're still waning, but maybe and again, this is all neutralization antibodies. So I think we have a path to improve and tweak this vaccine. I don't know whether, I mean, again, it's going to be FDA's decision. I don't know whether this is going to be another prototype. I don't know whether this is going to be a beta prototype bivalent. I don't know whether it will be an Omicron prototype bivalent, but I think we're starting to see data that suggests that we can improve neutralization against the Omicron by these changes. Now, this is all predicated upon, again, I sound like a broken record, but we're out of money. I mean, and to everyone's credit, the Congress has been great. They've allowed us to do, I mean, I have, this is to be able to get
Maria's organizing a lung cancer walk.
Someone, if we can mute.
I think we've been just, very fortunate to be able to deliver some 700 million doses, right? I mean, under multiple platforms. Congress has been great, but we've used up all the dollars, and there's not, it's being held up. And we really need to break that log jam, because if we don't have, I don't have dollars to purchase those additional vaccines for the fall. So I think there's, I think there's very good work on both sides of the aisle, and hopefully this will get resolved. But it's been a great gift that we've had as the American people through their elected representatives has made available so we can buy these vaccines. But there's a holdup right now, and we need to resolve that.
Before so that's that's certainly sobering, or at least kind of a an infusion sort of reality, kind of knowing that that we don't have unlimited resources, and yet we still have we still have the issue of vaccines for children, right? Children under the age of 5. So what do you think what are your kind of thoughts on when will it be authorized? Again, no crystal ball here, but how do we kind of, but also sort of how do we prepare for deployment of it, and kind of also ensuring sort of uptake of the pediatric vaccines, which depends, you know, on parents, of course, being willing to vaccinate their children.
So let me just tell you what I expect. I expect data in from Pfizer in the next 2 weeks on the question of boost to the 5 to 11-year-old, and I hope the agency will be. I mean, that should be pretty straightforward. We need to see that data. I don't. My colleagues down here have gotten to the point. I do not go to a meeting with FDA or anyone where I don't say, where's the data below 6, right? You know, we've been pushing very hard to get that. I mean, I think that over the next, by early June, I hope we get this resolved. Again, it's going to be FDA's decision. Let me take 1 minute if I can and just give you where we are, because you will see that it is complicated.
It's complicated.
Okay. I mean, first of all, I mean, it was much easier to do clinical trials, right? When I mean, you never want people in the hospital, right? But doing clinical trials when you have a endpoint, these worked, you know, in prototype, in the ancestral. Doing clinical trials with Omicron when people are not ending up in the hospital, especially among kids on symptomatic disease, you know, the vaccine efficacy against symptomatic disease is probably only 40–50%. So you have to understand these trials are being done in a different environment. It's done in an Omicron world. Understand what the requirement was on kids, right? First of all, these were dose de-escalation. Right? I mean, as you always do, you start with the adolescents, and then you do your school age kids, and then you do your below 6, and you look for reactogenicity, and you look for immunogenicity, and you try to find the right dose. But you know, and the rule is the companies have to show not clinical efficacy, but they had to show immunobridging. So you had to show that you're, by giving the, you know, the adjusted dose for the pediatric, the dose you select, right, it has to achieve the same degree of immunogenicity as the adult dose in that 18 to 25-year-old. So Pfizer goes ahead and does that study, and from the 6 months to 2 years, bingo, it hit that immunogenicity, right? And it was no reactogenicity. I think fevers were like 6%. It was great. But on 2 years to 5 years, it missed that immunogenicity. I think the ratio was something like 60%. You know, if you compare the ratio of those neutralizing antibodies to the neutralizing antibodies in the 18, so it didn't hit. And then, even though these studies weren't powered for clinical efficacy, you still look at the case splits. And in an Omicron world, it didn't look great, because it was symptomatic disease. So people go, you know, hey, you know, you know, but it was never meant to be done against VE. Moderna goes ahead and does the same thing, and it hits both on immunogenicity. You saw they announced it 2 weeks ago. They hit that, but the vaccine efficacy they reported against symptomatic disease was something like 40%. And people will go, well, 40% is not that impressive. Well, if you don't like 40% symptomatic disease, you know, if you then don't give it to adults, because it's going to be no difference in adults than in kids. Pfizer went back and said, all right, well, we're going to now look at 3 doses. Moderna is coming in the next couple of weeks with its data on 2 doses. And FDA has to put this together. Is this going to be a 2 doses? Is this going to be a 3 dose? Do you trade off 3 doses? I mean, is it better, you know, will Pfizer over 3 days meet their immunogenicity targets, right? And then if these kids are not being hospitalized, how do you do the risk benefit, right? So suffice it to say, this is complicated, but I hope we can resolve this certainly no later than early June. I mean, it's time to get these kids protected.
Yeah, yeah. No, it certainly is, you know, and also, kind of reflecting on the challenge of doing these clinical trials in it's difficult to do clinical trials in adults also, but I think in kids, it's even more complicated. And then there's always sort of a lag time in when the trials for kids are getting started, even though I remember, the conversations about designing studies, vaccine studies for kids started early on, but the bar is so much different, as you were saying, in terms of the designing the study and kind of ensuring that there's sort of some safety data in adults before doing it in kids, et cetera. It's all, it causes kind of natural delays in the initiation of these studies, and therefore kind of the data are just later to come in. And I know sort of similarly with the antivirals like Paxlovid that's now being sort of studied in kids to kind of really kind of get precise sort of more data about kind of the pharmacokinetics, et cetera. It's more complicated.
And you see in that 5 to 11-year-old, I think the data is only 1 out of 3 kids, only about 30% of kids who are eligible to be vaccinated, are being vaccinated in that 5 to 11. So we need to do a better job. I mean, I've seen this disease firsthand, in 14, 15-month-old kids. Yes, I mean, I think they end up doing well, but still, this is a pediatrician, you watch the regression and developmental milestones during the period. I mean, it does set these we don't fully understand the implications for long COVID. I mean, I really hope that we can get get this done. Normally we do these, these data take us years to be able to get this, and we're doing it, in a matter of months. We need to solve this, and hopefully we'll get this done.
Yeah. Let me ask you, just wanted to looking at the time and some questions from the audience. There was sort of the question that we get asked a lot in terms of, do we think that we'll need vaccines sort of on an annual basis? Is that what's sort of on the horizon, a coronavirus vaccine that may be, sort of modified a little bit to kind of to hit that sort of broader antigenic space? So perhaps some reformulation, but is that what the direction that we're heading in? Yeah,
I mean, I think that, again, no decisions, all these will be carefully considered. They'll all be data-driven, FDA, the ACIP. I'm giving you all the caveats. But I think, yes, I think we're going to end up seeing, look, we can't predict what the epidemiological curves will be, but I think you've just, that's exactly where we're headed. Yeah, no, I think that's also sort of the answer I provide when I'm asked that question. I just want to be able to get, I want to be able to have a vaccine that, lasts, 9 to 12 months and doesn't wane before that, right? So that's what I want to, but I think we can get there, but I think you can expect that's going to be the future. And I think that's going to be great news. Look, again, everything you tell me, if we can break this link between, as we started off, between cases and hospitalizations, right? I think that's really the question. Then we can get on with our lives. I think that, tell me, I don't think we've given up on mitigation, but the appetite for masks is decreasing, right? That's the reality, right? The CDC's, the map still looks pretty green, and there's still ascendancy of cases. And yes, it says to consider putting masks back on when you have, when there's a risk of hospitalizations increasing, but, we may have broken that link. But if we don't have traditional, the mitigation, because, for whatever reason, societal norms are, we're not wearing masks and we're not socially distancing, and I understand that, then it's going to fall on us, increasingly the medical community, to be very adept, again, at treating this. And I think that's not just going to be, the specialists. We got to get our primary care colleagues, our family medicine colleagues, everybody look, the issue is these, I mean, Paxlovid is great, but you know, I mean, you got to start it right away, and that not everyone has a dog. So, I mean, I think that as this disease evolves, assuming we're not, you know, that the killer variant, you know, is not in the horizon, that we can stay within this Omicron with what we're dealing, you know, knock wood. I mean, I think the burden is going to fall a lot more on us to treat this, right? I think, and I think we have to adapt to that.
Right. Right. And I wonder sort of, and you were kind of alluding to this earlier, whether or not sort of, you know, now we're treating individuals clearly early on in their symptoms, because I think that's key. That's sort of the data have shown it. But also sort of whether or not it should be, you know, now we're looking kind of at progression of severe disease, but should we be evaluating treatment and what role it has in terms of preventing kind of the sequelae of COVID, like long COVID, because if we're sort of shortening the duration of symptoms, lowering the viral load, kind of the viral burden, are we mitigating kind of long-term complications and balancing that with the side effects of the drugs? And there are some comments from our audience about certainly you know, adverse events that have been seen with full dose ritonavir taken for a longer period of time, lipodystrophy, pancreatitis. You know, this is a much shorter course, right? But I think.
I mean, I would not. I mean, I will admit. I mean, I have prescribed this over the last couple. I mean, just because people need access to this, and you know, my great, you know, Cliff Lane, others. I mean, if this were more than 5 days of ritonavir, I'm not comfortable. But this is 5 days, and you know, I think that does give us, you know, hopefully, more room that some of the more complexities that we saw with chronic administration will not be here.
Yeah, and the dose is sort of. Dr. Ginsberg sort of posed the question that the dose is sort of low enough that we're not as sort of worried about kind of those complications.
But I would love. I mean, you know, Pfizer knows this. I mean, I have pushed them and others. I mean, I want to get an antiviral that's not based on ritonavir. Right. I mean, that's what we got to get to this year, because if this disease is not going away, and if we don't have a lot of mitigation measures in place, we're going to be dependent on, you know, and these vaccines. Maybe we can come up with a mucosal vaccine that is, you know, we haven't discussed that. You know, the science there is, I mean, is complex, right? I mean, it's people have, you know, worked for years. You know, the influenza, we've come pretty close. Their efficacy is not, you know, great. There is real adverse events with CNS, right? That we have to be careful of. We just have to, you know, we're going to have to come up with better therapeutics here on COVID.
Yeah, but it's sort of similarly to kind of what, you know, what happened with other viral infections like HIV, even, for example. You know, we started with these sort of drugs that were co-formulated with ritonavir and sort of moved away with it from it. Kind of as the field moved forward, we're sort of we're forced to do it at much faster speed nowadays.
Yeah, and look, I mean, the other issue is, how do you do a clinical trial? I mean, in a, you know, when people are not being hospitalized, so you don't have that endpoints. Those were hard endpoints. They were not easy trials, but they were trials you can have comfort in. If I don't have hospitalizations as the endpoint, and I'm dealing with symptomatic disease, I mean, it's softer endpoints. So, you know, I think, and then am I looking for superiority over Paxlovid? Is it non-inferiority? I mean, doing these trials, I mean, as this disease changes, also poses, you know, for the trialists, real questions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So then, you know, the sample size is an issue, and then we then have to think about what biomarkers could we be using to sort of measure efficacy, whether it's, you know, it's kind of collection of the duration of viral shedding, kind of, you know, amplitude of the viral loads, et cetera, rather than kind of clinical outcomes alone.
The reason I, you know, was really, one, it's always great to be back. But, you know, the other reason I wanted to be here is just to emphasize, you know, in some ways, with all the advances we've made, it's actually become more complicated now. And we have a lot of work to do, right? I mean, there's a lot of questions that we have to answer about this disease. And I think it's going to be physician investigator driven. We got through this last year, heroically. But I think this is major questions that we need answers to, that still, need people dedicating their careers to.
Yeah. And then just one other, there's an earlier question, just sort of kind of thinking about design of clinical trials kind of moving into the future, whether or not a new variant or an mRNA vaccine is kind of targeting new variants, whether it will require the same kind of clinical trial effort in the future as it did in the beginning. I'd love to hear your thoughts. I mean, I think that, we've learned so much about, and are kind of also learning about correlates of protection, that immunobridging studies would be perhaps possible. Yeah.
Look, just stick on the antiviral side, right? We can change the field overnight. I mean, if we have a surrogate or a correlate, and just stay, on the antiviral side. I mean, the way we were able to do the proteases back in 1996 in short order is under accelerated approval. We first took, correct me if I'm wrong, we took viral load and then CD4 counts, and we had validated them as an endpoint, right? And that shaved off a good year or two off those clinical trials. If we could validate, nasopharyngeal viral load is not the best, most reliable. Now, again, I think we have to go into the Pfizer data, into the Merck data, into the monoclonal data, and I wish we could, any help we can get on validating a surrogate, so those clinical trials on the antiviral, it will change the field overnight, because you could then do a trial. If you're measuring nasopharyngeal viral load, right? I can do that. It's much easier. I think FDA has been very much enlightened on the vaccine side, and as certainly as you've seen, as we've done on the variant, is basically taken with all the limitations of neutralization antibodies, and there's no such thing as just a perfect correlate, but we certainly know there is, it is a correlate, of protection. It's not the only correlate, right? It's not the only mechanism of action. So that's why, even in kids, just hit that target of an 18 to 25-year-old neutralization, and FDA has said that, they'll let it be used. So again, everything is getting these correlates, in my view.
Yeah. Thank you for that. So as we're wrapping up, I was wondering if there are any final thoughts or messages that you'd like to share with us, kind of with the Columbia community. You mentioned sort of the, kind of priming, the kind of inspiring future investigators kind of to pursue these types of questions.
This is a disease that I think is going to be with us, if I had to guess, in some form, over decades. And I think these are, if being able to participate in answering these questions from a clinical research point of view, we've gotten to where we've gotten, but there is enormous amount that we're going to be dependent on to do so, and we can't do it from our end. We need all the help, and you've been instrumental and obviously heroic in everything the hospital and school has done. I am concerned. As numbers go down, and as mortality goes down, I'm a little concerned. I want people to move on. I get that. I want people to have their lives back. I'm not sure we're quite ready. We'll see over the next number of weeks and months whether, I doubt we're really there to say that. But I think my greatest concern is that the public moves on, and its elected representatives move on, and we're already starting to see. Everybody was very gracious. I probably have spent, we've probably spent some $30-40 billion to get us to this point, and people were willing to make that available. But all of a sudden, the purse strings have tightened, and people go, we're out of this, we're done, let's move on to other issues. And that's my greatest concern, that we're going to be short-sighted and we're not going to see the kind of commitment in the long run.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we need to keep pressing that this is, at the forefront of the kind of the scientific and the public health agenda. I think that's kind of that advocate, would you say, sort of advocacy in that space.
Well said.
Make a difference. Yeah. Thank you, David. This was terrific. It was really wonderful to kind of hear your insights and reflections on what's certainly been a tumultuous but also exhilarating journey, I think, kind of to see the science move forward at such speed and change people's lives, as you said. It's quite a privilege. So thank you for sharing, spending the time with us.
It's an honor to be with you.